Yo, what is up everyone, back here with another video. Today we're going to be doing a Pokemon guide on Zapdos. I was debating changing the background to match, but I kind of forgot, so it happens. But hope you guys are doing well. Just so you guys know, so for the last Arcanine video, I know what's it called? I never fully EV'd the Mons. If you guys are interested in getting the EVs for like all the sets I kind of discuss, that's all on the Patreon as well, along with like every single team I use. I just uploaded another team up there, and I upload teams a ton up there and just like move sets, everything. So make sure to check that out if you haven't already. But yeah, we'll get right into it. So Zapdos is a really interesting Pokemon in this metagame. I think that it's something that is a little underutilized at the moment. If we go over to Battle Festival doubles, we can kind of take a look at it. So Zapdos as a whole has like 4% usage. It's actually really cool because I think it can exert a lot of pressure with its moves, specifically Thunderbolt, right? Volt Switch to reposition. Like there's a lot you can do with it, right? And Zapdos is a really cool mon in general because it has a lot it can offer. But I want to kind of break it down for you guys and first talk about the things that it does well versus. So Pokemon Zapdos beats. So we'll go over to the list and we'll kind of go through those Pokemon. So it matches up really well in the Togekiss. Arcanine does not like taking a neutral Thunderbolt, especially if it's Spec Zapdos, right? Scizor is pretty much walled by Zapdos, which is huge in the metagame, right? You're pretty much able to wall one of the best steel types in the metagame, if not actually the best steel type, right? Tyranitar obviously doesn't like dealing with, but typically you can do that with partners, right? Deal with that with partners. Rotom, it's actually pretty good into because you can deal a lot of damage before Rotom can set up, which is really nice. Heatran, I'd say, is pretty neutral. It can do some good damage to you. Breloom now, unfortunately, walls you unless you're, like, teching Drill Peck under your Zapdos, which I wouldn't recommend. Basically, the reason why is just because Zapdos has no flying moves. It's pretty much an electric move spammer. It does run Hyper Beam if you're running Specs, so that's nice to at least have neutral coverage for these mons. But realistically, you don't want to be clicking it too much, right? Strong neutral damage onto all of these. It's really good into rain. Gastrodon here, if you have Hyper Beam, you can chunk it for like 60% usually. So you can kind of combination chip it. So like do like 40% with another mon or something like that. Just get it in range and then Hyper Beam it, remove it, right? So pretty strong. And then as we continue down, you'll kind of see, like there's just a ton that electric types just neutrally hit, right? Besides like the obvious ones like ground types and stuff like that. But pretty much the main idea here that I'm trying to convey is that Zapdos has a very nice niche because it is the strongest special attacker. It doesn't require setup like Rotom Wash to deal damage, and it has access to a lot of interesting tools, right? So I'll just put some general Pokemon that Zapdos can deal with pretty comfortably here. Azumarill, right? I'd say it beats Rotom Wash fairly comfortably, right? Mostly the waters is what it matches up well into, like I discussed. Togekiss is a really big one. And let me get like two more here so you guys can see. Scizor is a huge one, I think. And I'm going to put Politoed here. Or Politoed or Pelipper, both suffice. Kind of the same concept, right? Pretty much the reason why these are so strong is because there's so many water types in the format, like good water types and like flying types, along with Scizor, that you can just kind of wall with Zapdos, and that's really nice, right? Now, if we're going to talk to Pokemon that Zapdos is weak to, that you kind of need to account for with his partners, Pokemon Zapdos is weak to. We're going to put down a couple. So I'm going to put down Garchomp. Garchomp can give you problems because obviously the only thing you can hit with Cyber Beam, it outspeeds you. It can go for Rock Slide, stuff like that. Latios, really good into you because it can just Ice Beam you or Draco Meteor you for a bunch of damage, and there's very little you can do, unfortunately. So it kind of requires you to swap. I'm going to put Cresselia here as a soft check because it can't really break Cresselia that well. Cresselia is really good natural bulk, and it can kind of just sit in front of you and like kind of spam you with Ice Beam, and there's not too much you can do about it, so it's kind of rough. Tyranitar is another thing that potentially gives you issues, so you need to be careful with that. And then as we continue down the list, I'd say the next thing that comes to mind would probably be Raikou, but only because it can wall it, and it can just set up screens in front of it. So kind of capitalizes off of passive turns of you doing nothing, right? And then Gastrodon, I'd say, is a soft check. As I mentioned, you can chunk it with Hyper Beam, but realistically, it does completely wall it in majority of situations. So these are some Pokemon you're going to have trouble with, but realistically, you should be fine as long as you have a partner that can deal with them. And I'm going to get into this when we go into the partners that go with Zapdos well, because a lot of the partners help deal with these certain Pokemon that Zapdos is weak to, right? And the main important thing to keep in mind is that every Pokemon is going to be weak to certain things in the metagame, right? It's just important about pairing them with the right thing that kind of complements certain Pokemon, right? And like they kind of work together. So for example, we'll go and look at some common partners now. This is some Arcanine sets that I have for another thing, for the Patreon actually specifically. Where is it? So we'll go here, right? And now we'll take a look at Garchomp. Okay, so Garchomp is, let me put this here, Zapdos Best Partners, right? So Garchomp is one of Zapdos' best partners because it can freely click Earthquake next to Zapdos, and that actually helps it deal with a lot of Pokemon that Zapdos doesn't like. Specifically, what's it called? Raikou, Tyranitar. You can Dragon Claw into these two dragons. Obviously, that's a little risky into Latios, but into opposing Garchomps, it's pretty safe, right? So you pretty much have like really good tools when it comes to dealing with the things that Zapdos doesn't like. And one of the teams I'd uploaded to Patreon, if you guys are interested in that too, and it's just the reason why I bring it up is because it's specifically relevant to this point, had this core. And the reason why this core is strong offensively is because it covers a lot of the things that Zapdos is specifically weak to. So let's take a look at what Zapdos is weak to, right? The dragons, Gardevoir covers that. Cresselia is the only thing not covered so far. Tyranitar doesn't like taking Moonblast from Gardevoir, doesn't like taking Earthquake next to Zapdos, and Raikou doesn't like taking Earthquake, and you can tech Energy Ball and Gardevoir for Gastrodon, right? And Gardevoir doesn't really like dealing with Scizor, which Zapdos can deal with, right? And Garchomp doesn't really like dealing with any of these Mons, so Zapdos can deal with that. Now, the reason why these work together, because you might be like, oh, well, what if you run something like Discharge on your Zapdos? Well, because Gardevoir has Telepathy, which means it can't get hit by spread moves from allies, you can basically click Earthquake next to Gardevoir, and you can click Discharge next to Gardevoir, and it makes a really dynamic core that works together well. And this is the kind of stuff you kind of want around Zapdos, right? This isn't the only specific Zapdos build, but it basically gives you an idea of like how you want to build around them on. So I'm going to put Gardevoir here because Telepathy, you can kind of spam Discharge next to it, which is really nice. If we're looking at other Zapdos partners that typically see a lot of play or could be good, Tyranitar is one of them. So Tyranitar may seem a bit of a weird choice at first, but if you think about it, right? Zapdos is typically struggling versus Latios and Cresselia. So you have Tyranitar, which can break those, right? You have the Steel type weakness, right? Which from Tyranitar, which is covered by Zapdos, which is really nice. And on top of that, Tyranitar can remove the weather from rain teams to give Zapdos even more of an advantage next to it. So it's a super cool tool and Pokemon you can use to kind of go along with that core. Yeah, that's pretty much the main idea with partners. You just have to make sure that the partners are kind of complementing Zapdos. The obvious other partner for Zapdos is Arcanine. Arcanine obviously is like really good to intimidate the things that Zapdos doesn't like dealing with, and it can go for Snarls to kind of make sure it stays on the field longer. So now we're going to go into actual Zapdos sets. So going into the actual Zapdos sets, I want to highlight two sets because I feel like those are the two relevant ones for Zapdos specifically. Now, the two relevant sets for Zapdos, in my opinion, are going to be the Choice Spec set and the Citrus Berry, like, kind of recovery bulky Zapdos set. Now, a lot of people say that Zapdos isn't good because it only gets an electric move, but my number one example would be in VGC 2018, which granted is a different format, right? Yuri used Zapdos without Heat Wave the entire format, and it was still valuable because the rest of the teammates covered for its weaknesses. So just because Zapdos doesn't have a coverage move doesn't mean it can't be good. However, that being said, Yuri probably would have had an easier life in some scenarios when there was Heat Wave on Zapdos, because I've watched a lot of 2018 VODs. But you can play without a fire move, right? It is playable. And that is worth discussing. So first we're going to go over the choice specs anyways. Thunderbolt being a big move on the Zapdos. The main reason is strong stab, you know, can do a bunch of damage, whatever. Hyper Beam, important because it allows you to hit ground types. So if there's ever an end game where you're caught out of position, you can hit the Hyper Beam into a Gastrodon. You get the Hyper Beam into a Garchomp, something like that to clean up a game just in case you are caught in that position. It doesn't completely remove all your options. Next thing you want is Discharge. Discharge is going to allow you to kind of spam those electric moves. If you have a partner that you can spam it next to, this move is even better. If you don't have a partner you can spam it next to, you could consider another move, but honestly, there aren't too many moves that Zapdos likes using, so I think Discharge is probably your best option. Yeah, if you look, there's like not really any moves there. And then Volt Switch would be the final. You definitely need Volt Switch. It gives you positioning. You can kind of pivot. There's very limited pivoting in this format, so it's actually really nice to be able to click Volt Switch with Zapdos and kind of utilize that to swap in and out, right? And then for the bulkier Zapdos set, we're going to actually be touching on Citrus Berry set. Very reminiscent of 2018, as I had mentioned. You're pretty much able to sit in front of whatever you want to deal with and take those hits. The only drawback is Zapdos unfortunately doesn't get Tailwind, which is kind of a detriment to it. However, you do get access to other moves. I think Light Screen is actually a really cool option that not many people are using at the moment. You can tech Drill Peck as well if you want to hit those grass types that you're weak to. The thing is, though, like, once you have a modest nature, Zapdos isn't really hitting hard, so it's literally just to hit things that just, like, don't have much defense and can be hit by it. So, in my opinion, might not be the most useful thing. Does it get access to Reflect? It does not. Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I figured. I would probably be running Protect and Roost as your last few moves, because you can just kind of be a little bit more defensive with it, right? You could Protect, you can Roost, you can do all that stuff, and it's not too much trouble. If we look at the actual status moves it can use, it doesn't have too many things that you necessarily want to make use of. Roar is a really nice option if you want to be phasing things out. Also, Thunder Wave is really good speed control. So, one thing I've seen is Thunder Wave on these Zapdos, and then having Light Screen, right? Because it's speed control, Light Screen to kind of amp up the bulk of your team, and then Roost, right? And, like, it's not Tailwind, but you're still statusing things so that they're going to be slower. Now, obviously, the main thing that this set has a weakness to that the other set doesn't is that you can't really hit stuff like Garchomp or, like, ground types. However, excuse me. However, that's not really that important if you have partners covering for it, right? So it's kind of like a Regieleki almost in a way. So like if you look at Regieleki in Series 11 or anything, right? It can't touch ground types pretty much besides Max Strike, but they usually don't run that. So you're usually running only electric moves on it, which means that you are susceptible to ground types, you know? So you have to compensate for that with your partners. But yeah. So that's pretty much it for Zapdos movesets. The specific EVs and everything will be up on the Patreon. But as always, guys, thank you for the support on the videos. If you have any questions below, make sure to ask. I'll do my best to answer them in the comments. And make sure to let me know what Pokemon you'd like to see next for these guides, alright? Thank you again for watching the videos, as always, and I will see you guys on the next one. Peace!